I'm going to begin with Cezanne, why not, and assert that he is a generative artist. He's often used to talk about the transition to modernism, but I think he's just as good to talk about the transition to generative art. And Giacometti, another generative artist, I think. So I'm going to provide sort of a background, a context for my own practice. These are sort of inspirational pieces, but I think sort of I think there's a through line connecting to the sort of argument I'm going to make that the generative work kind of moves through painting, through coding, through AI, and it's still in painting, at least in my own practice. My background, I grew up in New York and studied with people from the New York Studio School. It was a very rigorous, observational-based practice. I'm going to go through just a lot of images here. This was one of my mentors, Neil Welliver. And these people were struggling, the people that I was sort of studying with, the work that I was really excited about, were people that were trying to struggle with not sort of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? They were really, really passionate about painting, but they didn't want to, just get into some kind of romantic tradition. So they sort of rejected the academy. They were looking for a rigorous way of sort of reinterpreting painting to make it feel like a contemporary practice, with their eyes wide open of what was happening in the art world. This is a painting by Stanley Lewis, really important American painter who's finally getting his due, I think. I suspect many of you knew who that was. Al Held, another American abstract expressionist who eventually went to this kind of very tight geometric painting. I remember looking at this painting when it first came out, this body of work, and I wasn't involved in computing at the time, but there was something about this that really shook me, this whole body of work. It was not very well critically reviewed, this body of work. And of course, de Kooning. This is an early drawing of mine, just to show I come from this fairly rigorous observational background. Again, it wasn't pure academy, but it was still very much, let's see if I can make this a little larger. Very much based on observation. I was really interested in perceptual data. This was an early large painting of mine done plein air. It was about I think about a 84-inch by 84-inch painting, 7 feet by 7 feet. And I was really sort of asking myself, can I put together abstract expressionism with sort of ideas of modernism, with color theory, with field painting? I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was really young, but I was trying to make this attempt to kind of make painting vital still. Again, with my eyes wide open. I didn't want to just get into some kind of romantic tradition. The work became flatter. This was a show I had in New York at the Bowery Gallery. I say it was big paintings by a little man. And then I stopped painting. So this is around 1999, I think. I just stopped painting because basically I couldn't figure it out. I say that sort of in jest, but I had that show in New York and I was really frustrated. There was no great precedent. There was not much interest in painting in the world that I was living in. But I was really interested sort of in technology. I had a background in science before I studied painting and drawing and never knew what to do with it. And so one day I got sick and I was laid up for a couple weeks. And I just thought I'll just sort of play with the computer, and I ended up teaching myself some programming. So this was a very early piece of mine that was sort of me basically looking at the code that I was learning, looking at my paintings and saying, can I write some code to sort of generate somewhat of a field painting? And within about an hour, my whole world had changed because I had produced hundreds of paintings using simple randomization, many of which seemed more interesting and dynamic than the paintings that I was spending weeks and months working on. So it was both disturbing but also very, very exciting. I'm shifting years ahead here, but the problem was I wanted to do something more figurative, I should say, or something that was more with my intent as opposed to just pure randomization. So I generated a series of these kind of sort of fossils, or I'm not sure exactly what they are. I called them protobytes. And I started using the code, and I got a little better with the math, to be able to sort of sculpt with these tools, to be able to generate forms that felt more particular, more specific, more connected somehow to what I was thinking about when I was painting. And I built a series of software. I was trying to figure out ways of, again, making this serious work. I was still kind of, I came from this really rigorous arts tradition, and I didn't want a shortcut. I didn't want something slick. That was sort of a bad word for us at the time. And so I started looking at how can I use these new tools I'm learning to kind of do something interesting. So this was a machine I built to be able to visualize Hans Hofmann's work. So Hofmann's talked about this push and pull. It was very flat work that he was trying to get the different planes of color to shift back and forth through color relationships. And so I worked with one of his students, and we built this kind of interactive piece where you could kind of engage with it and things would shift based on some of these color theories. This was an early piece where I started thinking about things like AI. Specifically, I got very excited with genetic and evolutionary programming. I found that extremely fascinating. But what I didn't like about a lot of these things was this idea of intelligence. I thought there was something much more interesting in kind of stupidity or neuroses. So this was a series of, I call them neurotobots, and the idea where these were kind of agents that were just burdened with neuroses. So I had lots of experiments with these sorts of things. I'm not sure if any of them were important works of art, to be honest with you, but I was just going down this path. And then I got involved with this processing community that was mentioned a little earlier with Casey Reese and Ben Fry, and there was a time when right before this book came out, honestly, where there was very little information out there for people like me to learn. Now we have this whole burgeoning NFT generative art space. At the time, there was just a couple of us spread around the world doing this. There wasn't social media. We'd go onto these online forums and ask a question, and maybe a week later we'd get an answer. The books were all written for computer scientists, not for artists. Processing was just coming out, really. So I ended up writing this book on processing. In truth, I had asked the publisher about doing a book on ActionScript, which was part of the Flash programming language, which is what I was really using. But this was kind of the new hot language, they thought, so I wrote the book on processing. They were right. So spent a good year and a half working on this book that was supposed to be 300 pages, and I got so kind of into it, it became 1,000 pages with hundreds of examples, and this kind of love affair I developed, not only for processing, but the entire generative community. Sorry. And then there was another book and another book, and this took a bunch of years of my life that I think probably if I could go back in time, it would have ended after the first book. What ended up happening, which was really unexpected, was the computer science community contacted me. Some professors said, we've heard about your work, we think that it'll have application in teaching computer science to computer science students. So I started working with them, and we got a bunch of National Science Foundation grants and created pedagogy and examples for the regular CS classroom, which was in some ways funny because I had taught myself this stuff with my 2 degrees in painting. And then I stopped coding for a while. So you see this pattern. It's not that it wasn't going anywhere, it's just that something was missing, and that was, of course, the physical part of my life as a painter. I really didn't become a painter to make pictures. I didn't realize that till later. I became a painter because this process of working in the flow and looking intensely and getting lost in that moment made me healthier, right? It was just something that was really important for me in a kind of a deep way that I wasn't super in touch with. So at some point, I just got really burnt out with the code, and I just started drawing. In fact, I was in London, walking around, walking into an art store, bought a pencil, and just started screwing around, and then it became this multiple years of all I did was draw and paint again. So what was most surprising about this experience for me, though, was that I was different now. I was not, something had happened from all the computing, right? Which I guess could be sort of a cautionary tale for all this AI, I don't know, but I started seeing the world and feeling things and asking myself, what is the algorithm? What is the underlying algorithm? And I talked about feeling this embodiment of the algorithm. So I wanted to create a drawing process that did not rely on visual observation, this kind of sort of tradition I had learned. I wanted to start with nothing. I wanted it to be a pure emergent generative process like with the coding. So I just started scribbling with no intention at all. In fact, I used different hands. I would have the computer sometimes print out random stuff, and then I would start the drawing. And what I would look for is some type of emergent order. And I would try to not let myself see the order too soon. I really wanted to struggle with this. So I did a large body of work of these totally emergent automatic drawings. Of course, automatic drawings is not a new thing, but for me, how it came into my practice was a very, very new thing, and it was completely informed by the computing. For many years when I was coding, I used to, in my little talks, spreading the word about this stuff, I would talk about trying to make code drip. Because I was really thinking about the painting metaphor. And now the other thing, it was having the other effect on me. It was affecting how I was drawing and painting. The problem is that I was still not living this quite integrated existence, right? I still had this kind of technical coding thing. I had the drawing painting thing. I wanted to somehow bring these worlds together. I felt sort of bifurcated. So I tried all these experiments. So I started doing digital imaging and then using those as motifs to go back to painting. The image here of Richard, the background was actually rendered. I wrote my own, over many years I wrote this library called Protobyte that generated all kinds of artificial life forms. I spent years on this thing. And so I would use it to generate these kind of forms, and then I would composite an image with that, do some more digital imaging, and then use that as a motif and paint it from observation. So I was trying desperately to figure out ways of integrating these practices so I sort of felt like a whole person. And then I stopped doing that. And this is much more recent now. And then I was sitting having coffee with an ex-student who told me, did you hear about this thing called art blocks? So how many of you have heard of art blocks? Wow, okay. Rough crowd, I'm going to say, but no. So Art Blocks is a generative NFT marketplace platform on the Ethereum blockchain, and when Ethereum came out, when Art Blocks came out, it sort of changed things dramatically for people who were doing generative art. So again, people like me who were doing processing stuff and were doing action scripts a couple years ago, we were a very small little population spread thinly. There was not much connection to the art world. There was a couple of places, there was a couple of things we learned about, but it was basically sort of this niche thing. And I was already in a niche painting community, so this is, and then when Art Blocks came out and people started selling collections of generative art, the same stuff we had done 20 years ago, for literally millions of dollars, it was kind of a shock. And so this student of mine, we were sitting having coffee, and he said, hey, do you see this thing, Art Blocks? This looks like the stuff you taught us. So I looked at it, I said, yeah, and then I looked at what was happening in the marketplace, and it was kind of shocking. So it piqued my interest, obviously, because I had all these skills, but more importantly, I got involved in these communities. It was not so much the Art Blocks community that got me involved, it was this community called FX Hash. So this is a project on FX Hash. FX Hash is, again, it's an NFT, it's a generative NFT marketplace, it's a platform that on the Tezos blockchain, where artists create work, they put it up on the blockchain, and then people can purchase instances of this piece. So this piece, for instance, we're looking at here has, I think, what does it say, 96? I can't read, my eyes aren't good. 90 instances. So we're writing one algorithm with enough randomization that when it runs, if we do a good job, it can keep changing. Everyone who mints one, we call it, will get their own unique instance of this program, which will live forever in some way connected to blockchain technology. And there's a lot more to talk about that, which I'm not going to go into. Our next speaker may go into that a little bit. But so the work lives on the blockchain. And these pieces, I'll just give you an example. The pieces that I do tend to be very physics-based. So in this example here, there's a kind of a mesh, a cage mesh, that I actually throw physics at. I have, again, that Protobyte library I wrote over many years. And then this object, this kind of organic form, is deformed based on the weights on that netting. And again, every time you run this, it will run differently. I want to make sure I don't close all this. Okay, good. This is another piece. The pieces are also interactive. This is a piece called Glomularis. I've done this. This is the third version of this. It was just exhibited in New York recently because we can actually exhibit these things now, which is different. This piece is interactive, so I'm going to interact with it now. I think I am. And the piece lives and kind of, you can travel, it travels around in this interior space that you can kind of visit, and you can kind of go in and zoom into the creature and things like that. But this is all generative. There's no AI here. This is just sort of relating to my interest in artificial life forms. But I did a lot. I've done 23 project things on FX hash. But I stopped again. So what's the problem? The problem is that this is how we map art. This is how we map an image to geometry in a generative space. It's totally mechanical. There is no bias. There's no semantic bias. There's no kind of fuzziness or creativity. It's just a one-to-one mapping. The way the camera works, it's very clever what we can do with virtual cameras. But again, it's just pure deterministic math. So the problem for me has always been is that there's something about painting, that reason that I do it, that just kind of makes me healthier, that's never been connected to me in the computational work that I've done, even though I've done a tremendous amount of it. When I come to London on a trip, I came here a week before, I don't go to the computer museum. I go and stand in front of Piero della Francesca. I go and stand in front of Titian. So those are the pieces that still move me deeply emotionally, just like we heard Bach earlier. I want that in the computational work too. I think the two can come together. And they did for me, and that was through AI. So this was a long preface to get to AI. But this is a drawing of mine, an automatic drawing. Sometimes the automatic drawings I do turn into figuration like this. I never know what's going to happen. And I fed this piece into the AI in Stable Diffusion, and everything changed for me. Okay, so one day I was messing around. I knew what was happening with the GAN work that was happening in AI. I looked at a lot of AI work. The reason I never got interested in it was because the aesthetic, the AI aesthetic, the artifacting in it was too strong. I didn't see how it related to my own practice, and I didn't want to learn some cool new tech. I knew a lot of cool tech. That wasn't going to do it for me. But when I put my drawing in here, and then I ran this 20 times, I felt like I was communing with artists in the 14th century. I felt like, or 15th century, I felt like I was hanging out with Piero. It's hard to explain what I mean by that, but it changed my life. Another one of my automatic drawings, something through the AI. Many people think of the AI in terms of this world that I'm in as these kind of very photorealistic, kind of hyper-realistic things, these deep fakes. For me, what's amazing about it is it now brings figuration into this generative space, right? Where I was limited to basically geometric types of variation in what I was doing. Now I can bring my painting sensibility to this, which has been like mind-blowing. Another one of my drawings, and then one of the outputs. A self-portrait, and then it actually brought me back to almost a photographic type of sensibility. Here's a good example. I spent a long time on this painting, which I don't really like, and then I put it through the AI, which is much better than my painting. There's still a problem with this, where does this exist, because this is a digital file, and I do address that right at the end here. This is a piece that I generated, one of my protobytes with code, and then I put it, whoops, sorry. And then I put it through the AI. I gotta just back up a little bit here, sorry. I'm gonna have to skip, oh, there it goes. And it put this finish on the piece, which was shocking to me, right? Just by taking that initial wireframe that I rendered, and then the AI put this finishing skin on it for me, was just mind-blowing. And then I started generating AI that was just AI. In other words, I didn't start with any kind of initial drawing of mine. I just started working with prompts, sometimes an initial image, but it didn't have to be my work. Let me go back, there's a couple more of those for a second. And I felt like something was happening where the work was actually becoming about, it wasn't just about this commentary of my own work. And then I did a series of these short form AI collections. Short form in the sense that I generated these images with the AI, and then I put them up on different NFT platforms. This is on the object platform on the Tezos blockchain. I built this whole world of the oracles we'll see in a second. And with the oracles, I built creatures and mechanical objects to sort of fill in this world. So the oracles became this other kind of big investment in my life of getting involved in this group called Emergent Properties. Emergent Properties is the first platform to do what we call long-form generative AI. And what we do is we combine sort of the generative coding we did, I showed you with the FX hash and with processing, into the pipeline that automatically then goes into Stable Diffusion, which is one of the libraries, in a sense, that we use to do AI. So Oracles was a project that was the genesis, the first project on this platform. We generated 1,000 of these oracles, and it got a lot of recognition. We sold them for less than $1 each. So it was very inexpensive, but it was really a proof of concept that we could generate a body of work that was, in a sense, doubly generative. And we went from there to a project called Beasts, and Beasts took it one step further. So with Beasts, we actually generated a generative artwork, a regular full generative artwork, which we then fed into the AI with generative scripts and generative values. And there's a lot of art historical. I would suggest you, if you're interested, to go to mprops.ai and look at this project. I'll be done, sorry. And you can learn more. There's a lot more reference to it. And I'm just going to finish with these final pieces. The one thing I want to say about these final pieces is that these are now becoming paintings. And so it's finally kind of come full circle. These will actually become physical paintings based on work done. The motif is generated through the AI. Thanks.